Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Dave Hester. I am the leader of the Guides community here at LifeGuides. Today is a wonderful and exciting panel that we have, specifically focusing not only on Black History Month, but focusing on how organizations can improve their DE&I. And I bring a wealth of knowledge from my many endeavors, specifically in the tech space, as well as in the clinical space. And I have two wonderful, supportive, loving human beings with me today, and I can't just gloat about them as any more than I can. So I have the wonderful Leslie. She is one of our guides here at Life Guides. And for those of you who may not, I've spent a lot of time with Leslie. If you want to feel light, like just by talking to someone, have a chat with her. You can feel the light, like when talking to her. No lies there. And of course, on the other side, I do have my brother Phillip. It's good to see you. Phillip is everything. He's an author. He's a former, he's a military vet. He's working. I'm going to shout you out real quick. He's, working on continuing his education and supporting people who are, dealing with psychological challenges. And so I want to applaud him for doing that. And before we do really jump into it, I want to say to everyone, just a quick trigger warning. We're going to be talking about some challenging things during this session. So if you feel like you're not in a space where you can absorb or even address some of these, it's okay to take a step back. If you're listening, to this recording in the future and another time, it's okay to take a moment and come back to it when you're ready to absorb. There's no judgment at all. It's really up to you. But I want to put that out before we get started. So that everyone can just be properly informed about how this conversation is going to go. But above all, we are going to have fun. It's going to be a lot of information that we're going to provide to you. And yeah, let's jump into it. So first thing I wanted to talk about, everyone, if you've received the notifications, it's stated that, it's J.E.D.I, just, equitable, diverse. And before I, jump in to the inclusive part, I want to preach about how, and yes, I use the P word, preach, which sometimes can be looked at as negative, but I'm using it in a positive sense here, so don't hit me. But I want to preach the importance of inclusion, of just having people having the opportunity to feel their right to express themselves. For example, right now, I'm expressing myself by wearing my, HBCU educated sweatshirt. When you are expressing yourself, even within the workplace, I feel comfortable doing this because my organization has provided us with opportunities to really show who we are, and they want that inclusive nature. So I want to ask, I'll turn it straight to you, Leslie. I want to ask you of an example that you've seen of inclusivity, within this organization or even in other organizations that stood out for you.
Well, the one thing I will say about LifeGuides is that we have a huge spectrum of so many different guides from different walks of life, age groups, nationalities, and backgrounds. And with that melting pot of diversity, I think it really offers a lot to people that may feel like no one really can relate or understand or connect. And so with us just kind of having that platform, I think it just says volumes to what people are searching and looking for, because we're here, we're ready to receive those people that find themselves in those situations where they're just kind of seeking that validation. And so I feel LifeGuides is just an excellent starter point for so many people if they're struggling within the workplace. It offers a direct line to just a link into that diversity that we support and encourage, actually.
No question. We 100% encourage it. And I want to kind of take a little quick turn here and talk about American history. So I know some of you signed up. You were like, wait. I did history class in primary school. Why are we doing this again? But I think it's important that we just talk about the shared history of American history, specifically when we talk about Black History Month. And so I want to ask Phillip, just real quick, if you could share what this month and what Black history always means to you in relation to American history.
Um, so they go hand in hand. They're not separate. American history is Black history, and Black history is American history, and understanding that they are intertwined is part of the, the eye that we didn't end up getting to, but that's the inclusion, understanding that because we have historically been seen and treated as different doesn't necessarily mean that we are less than or less capable, or some of the other monikers that we have gotten throughout history in terms of being lazy or welfare queens, or all of that kind of stuff. Those words and those stereotypical beliefs were uh were founded on principles that Black people were actually doing something opposite than what we really were, which was essentially building the foundation for the country. You're not going to be able to build the country without money. How are you getting money? By growing and processing crops. Who was growing and processing the crops? It was Black people. We did that, So it's to say that we are history, and this month should be a celebration of everything Black, because you can't have the type of America we have without us. Even today, Black culture is, essentially the culture that verifies everything in society as being cool, from music to fashion to sports to anything that people love. Black culture oftentimes verifies that. So we are American history, and American history is us, and we are one and the same. And once America and American society, and even broader societies, embrace the Black people that they have, I think that those countries, those societies, those civilizations will be all the better for it.
Outstanding. Wow. All right. Show's over, everyone. Thank you. No, I'm just kidding. all jokes. And that's another thing that I think is important to point out is the humor, the fun that we all bring when you have different folks in the room. And speaking of different folks in the room, I want to address a challenging thing that's happening across the board with corporations, which is the somewhat defunding of DE&I. People are the CHROs who were bringing in these people to lead these initiatives are now facing less funding, less accessibility, and sometimes even opposition to having DE&I courses or even educational opportunities within an organization. So now we're stuck with this. Funding is drying up. So how do we do more with less? Which I know for everyone here, especially the people who are typically used to doing that, doing more with less can sound like a bad thing. It can sound like, all right, here we go again. We're doing more with less. But there's still something in there that we can do that doesn't include financial support. So I wanted to first share and then hear everyone else's thoughts on how you can potentially advocate, for diversity while not having the funding, besides you. So that means, how can you support others in bringing new voices to the room when you don't have the funding to support that?
Well, I'll answer on my end. When we did a prep call for this, it's gonna sound redundant, but you guys have already heard this, but I am a big advocate on just being in a state of awareness. And what I mean by that is that there are so many people that are numb to some of the current day issues just because they don't want to deal with that, or they say, oh, that doesn't affect me. I'm not that one. I'm not that person. I love everyone, and sometimes, it could be some of the microaggressions and things that we're just not aware that we're doing. I mean, even people of color, we need to step out of that. And I think a huge start in that direction is maybe sometimes dislodging a lot of our old belief systems from the past. I
Mhm.
think that that's a
Mm.
huge piece. Not looking too far in the future and kind of seeing, okay, what is this going to look like? I just really think it's just having an awareness of things around you. And we don't need to outsource to have an awareness. You don't need someone else to come in and say, hey, wake up. This is what's going on around you. I mean, over the last couple of years, since we were plagued, with all of this craziness going on, I think we all kind of had a wake up, shake up call as to we're all in this together. This is not divided by race or even economic status. This is across the board for humanity. And for that reason alone, I think that we need to build and start from there. We don't need to, I don't feel like it's necessary to go back and say, hey, these are the missing pieces. Let's take a look at those and see how we can change them. I feel like
Mhm.
the awareness is from now. Let's see what we can do now.
Mm.
And if you just take those lenses and maybe, put on a different set, you'll see what needs to be done. And it's just treating people with a sense of love, humanity, and just the inclusion that everyone wants to have, no matter what walk of life you come from.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Phillip, how do you
Man.
add on to that?
Yeah, like, next question, Leslie. Oh, goodness gracious! Like, how do how do you follow that? Golly, that was so good. What I'll say is a practical solution, and this is for all of the supervisors, the managers, the CEOs. You more than likely are going to be working with diverse groups of people. Make sure that you make them feel as if their voice matters every
Mhm.
time they speak. Do not shut out people who are subordinate to you simply because they are subordinate to you. Because some of the best ideas come from the people who are doing what they're doing every day. So
Mhm.
we often, when you get into positions of power, a lot of people will take that power to mean they are right all the
Mhm.
time. But if you understand that being a manager, being a supervisor, being somebody in a position of power does not actually mean that you're right all the time. And you need the people around you to help evolve the ideas that you have, then you'll understand that it doesn't matter from the janitor to the person directly under you who reports only to you. Everybody has a voice. Walks of life don't necessarily matter. Orientations don't matter. Races don't matter. None of that stuff matters in the grand scheme of things, because in essence we're all working towards the same thing, which is to have a happily um fulfilled life. And if we're not facilitating that in the workplace, which is where a lot of people spend the majority of their time, then
Mhm.
when they go home, instead of people bringing the joy from home into work, they will bring the stress and strife of work home. And then
Mhm.
that in turn influences and can contaminate the house life and lead to problems that they didn't have at home if they felt as though they were being heard at work. So
Mhm.
we have
Mhm.
a responsibility, my and I'm a shout out my supervisor, Marie. I hope you're on here. Marie always 100% listens, and she is always very attentive, and she always is open to hearing what everybody on the team has to say. But I can speak for
Mhm.
me specifically. Marie always listened to me, whether she
Mhm.
feels as though it's a good idea or a bad idea, she listens, and that's what I want. Me and Marie are both people of color, but we're not the same race. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. If the point is to get the job done to the best of our ability, you need diversity and the inclusion of different perspectives and different ideas to to lead innovation, because that's all
Yeah.
what we're all trying to go towards in the grand scheme of things. So supervisors, managers, bosses, listen to your employees and make sure that they feel as though they're being heard.
And there's a
That's-
huge difference, if I might add, from being heard versus listening. Because a lot of times supervisors will hear it, but are you listening to what's really being said? Because if you're not truly listening, you will miss some of the spaces and the gaps, because that's where you can, as an effective leader, plug in some effective solutions so that those people continue to be heard, and they can continue to listen to how they can make improvements to make that a better space. Because like you said, you spend more time at work than you do home with your family. So, well put how you said, you're taking that stress from work home versus taking the joy of home to work. And then, so it definitely needs to be a turnaround with that. Well put, Phillip. Well put.
It does. It needs to be also addressed that people want to be seen. And
Yes.
and when I say seen, I don't just mean seen through the perhaps tainted lenses that you have based on your experience, or the internal bias that you have. Like, let's speak about me, for example. Sometimes people come to me and they say, "Oh, you're Dr. Dave." So I get this halo effect, which is an inherent bias that they may have towards me, that everything I say is right. It's not. Challenge me. I'm not always right. And I can step up and say that I'm not. So it's important that we see people and understand our biases and how that influences how we connect with them. And you were talking about, diversity, and I really got excited because I thought about the importance of neurodiversity too. Having people on your team who don't think like you, who approach the world in a different way. I work with someone who has synesthesia, so they saw colors, or they heard colors, but it was so fun to work with them because they had a completely different perspective on the world. And the world is built basically for neurotypical people, and our organizations and jobs are built for neurotypical people. So how do we support, having people who have TBIs or neurodevelopmental disorders, to make them feel like they have a place within the work environment? And as a practical thing, I'll say the way that we do that is by seeing them for who they are, and accepting that it's not just demographics that are diversity. So I once heard someone say, "Oh, D&I is all about, making sure, Black and brown people have opportunities." Like, that's not true. That's a common misconception. It's about complete and acceptance and inviting of people who are different to the table to have a place to speak. So coming back to the neurodivergent thing, and thinking about how we can support others, you talked about being bringing your work kind of home. So I've heard the adage, be a boss, but then it's like, all right, well, what happens if you're not a leader but you're a boss? And people forget that individuals don't leave organizations, they leave bosses, or they leave bad leaders. So speak to, good leadership, especially in the face of dwindling funds for D&I and, less support. Speak to how a leader can continue to make things accessible for others.
I think that
I was about to say, Leslie, you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I just think that
out of the park.
I think that it's key to have that balance. I think that when there starts to be the issue of funding, where they're up against the wall, where you have the bigger entities that are saying, "Hey, we can't pool in this area at this moment," I think then it becomes the job of the effective leader to kind of create these substations where you can still, build the allyship within the organization. It just may have to come from a little bit more of internal resources versus external. And again, when you have a certain level of awareness, that makes it a little bit easier, because then you can kind of see where the demands are. You can see where you kind of may need to, let's just say, for example, in work projects, if you have a company and you have various projects, and you always seem to partner up certain team members with other team members because you think that they're a good fit, or, I think maybe that's a good start. We're putting together a diversity plan where you kind of mix up the pot a little bit, create projects where you're going to bring all of those diverse groups together to work together to kind of see where the strengths are. But again, an effective leader really, needs to have those components to put that together to know where, okay, let's put John over here with Sarah. Sarah has a totally different background. And maybe if we put those two elements together, we're going to create, this magnificent piece of work. And I just think that as a leader, you will have to sit down and kind of have that internal dialogue to see where you can tighten that up when you're forced out of, not having the funds to bring in an outside source. But again, I still feel that you don't need to do that because you're right on the I don't want to call it a battlefield, but you're right immersed in it. And if you open your eyes to where those needs are in awareness, you'll know what to do as an effective leader. I feel, honestly.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat that I want to definitely come to. One of them was, thank you, Catherine, for putting it in. How do you define allyship and appropriate ways to enact this concept in the workplace? Phillip, unless you have something you want to share about what Leslie said, I think this would be something good for you to speak on.
Well, no, Leslie, I'm not following that. No way. So I'll just go straight to the allyship. Allyship is, so it's not microaggressing against somebody because you have been brought up in these type of experiences and this is just the way you are. This is the way you think. This is the way people have spoken around you. Allyship is kind of what we spoke about, actually hearing somebody, actually listening to somebody, making sure that their voice is not just heard and not just listened to, but it is accounted for. Their voice has an impact on what is happening. It does not mean that their voice has to be the end all, but it also can't mean that their voice is invisible or you hear their voice, but the only time you hear it is when you're actually speaking to them. You have to bring it into these specific spaces with the goal of making sure that even if they can't physically sit at the table, their voice is at the table. That is allyship, essentially in a nutshell, and especially in terms of the workplace. Just making sure that you are not even sensitive necessarily, but you're not oblivious to the things that somebody else is going through. Being able to not sympathize, but empathize with what somebody is going through or the things that we have seen and how it could potentially affect us. Because the things that don't affect somebody might definitely affect me in ways that may affect my work and things like that. And I don't want the worst thing that you can do is to question that person and how it affected them when you don't know. Being an ally is making sure that you are abreast of those situations, and then also speaking out when you see that there are injustices in your workspace, not just saying, hey, wow, that's crazy, but that's their business. It's not my business to get involved. If you are an ally, you have an obligation to get involved because you see that person as somebody who you should be advocating for. They are your brother and sister in the workplace, or however you describe it. They're somebody that you see as needing and deserving the same rights as yourself. And then you will go so far as to advocate for those rights whenever the time calls for it. And it can be a dangerous thing to be an ally. In certain workspaces, bosses and things like that don't necessarily want allyship because that means advocating for injustices that they have built into their business. And so if you're
say that.
So if you're advocating for this person to receive equal rights to somebody else, or For instance, the wage gap, black women make 63 cents to every dollar that
Yep.
that
Equal
a
pay
white
now.
man makes. If you go into the place, you and a black woman get a white man and a black woman gets hired at the same time, and y'all discuss salaries, which is taboo, even though it's not really taboo. And that she got less than you, even though you guys are qualified in the same manner. Allyship is speaking up on that, saying something to them. Why is it that I got paid, my salary is this, and she got paid that? And you know what might happen? They may knock down your salary, but you know what you just got? You just got an ally in that black woman who understands and knows that you are fighting for what's right. Because in social justice and in all of these different movements and civil rights and all of that, what is being advocated for is the right thing. And so as long as you can feel in your gut that you're doing the right thing, then you are maintaining proper allyship. So that's what I would say.
That's wonderful. And I saw some, questions about advocacy and allyship. And yes, advocacy is there. It is sometimes risky, and you have to be willing to risk, like you said, to do what is right, what is just. Maybe sometimes it may not be right because there's a spectrum of things. And I want to also address some language that comes from being an ally. Or perhaps you may step up and ask for more support for some of your counterparts who are not receiving that same amount of support, and you may be deemed a SJW, which is short for social justice warrior, which is typically looked at as a negative and pejorative term for people who are trying to create a equitable society. And it's unfortunate that that's where we're at, but it is what it is. So it takes a level of courage, and it takes just being able to step up and say, hey, things aren't right, and I want them to be. And we talked about how people leave organization, or they leave bad leaders instead of organizations. That's where you can step in, is being that good leader, being that person who sees, hears, understands, and attempts to hold a space for them and their individual trauma. So speaking of individual trauma, I want to talk a little bit about the trauma that is the killing of men and women by police officers. No, so first, disclosure: my uncle, I have family in the law enforcement realm, and I continuously support financially, to some of these police organizations, because I do believe they have a place and they need to be a part of our life. However, what happened to Tyre Nichols is a situation that I believe induces and creates a level of trauma for everyone who's seen it, and for people who haven't even seen it but have been on the outskirts. They're experiencing that. So to be able to hold space for someone else's trauma is really important for your management, because if not, what happens typically in trauma, if someone doesn't feel like they're supported, they may develop symptoms. And I know I'm getting into my clinical bag a little bit, but they may start experiencing symptoms related to depression and anxiety, and we have to acknowledge that. And it's not just on Tyre Nichols. Think about women who have been, attacked violently, sexually, or have experienced sexual violence. We have to hold space for that individual and understand how they need to be approached and treated. Now, I get it. Some people may argue this is not scalable, because you may have thousands of people, but complex issues require complex and thought out analysis and interventions. All right, off the high horse there, but I do want to just bring a quick question to you, because later on in the session today, we're going to post some links to some of the articles and literature we're going to talk about. But I want to ask you, Phillip, because I read an article that you wrote about Tyre Nichols and the situation around police brutality, and how it happened to Black people, to all people. And I want to ask, do you see a need for advocation, allyship within that community for, yeah, do you see a need for advocacy and allyship within the, I could keep wanting to say military, but I'm talking about the police community.
Oh, yeah. Um, yes, I do. Tyree Nichols was a victim of racist ideals within law enforcement. And it sounds crazy because we know based on footage that the people who did what they did to him were black. And so how could it be how could there be racist ideals when black people did this to a black man? Well, the way that it is once you are indoctrinated into law enforcement or the military, essentially what you do is you lose your individuality or you purposely give it up for the sake of the whole, and you become not an individual entity, but you become a cog in the machine of whatever it is. In my instance, it was I was a airman in the Air Force. My last name was Barnes, but I am an airman in the Air Force. And it's the same thing with law enforcement. Well, if you know the origins of law enforcement, then you understand that it was made with the intent on capturing black people and bringing them back into slavery. Those ideals and the idea of the racist ideals within the law enforcement space have persisted to the point that even though there are black people and let me throw this disclaimer out, this does not mean that everybody in law enforcement is this way. It does not mean that everybody who swears into the police force is inherently racist or they will become racist by proxy. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is whenever the ideals of uh racism rear their head in law enforcement, there can be anybody of any race who can carry out those ideals against people of color and specifically black people. And so that's what happened to Tyree Nichols, and it's incredibly unfortunate, but also the black men who did this are definitely going to be made an example of as a way to kind of um to kind of pacify black anger towards law enforcement. And so they've already been hit with second degree murder charges and things like that. And that's all going to come down. And if we know anything about the way the court system works with black people, they don't really have much of a chance. It's pretty much, obviously everybody has their day in court, but people of color are typically sentenced much more often than white people, and especially in terms of incidents involving law enforcement. But um, that this can be something that we can look at to say, hey, at this point, it's not even white people in law enforcement or that is doing it, because there are black people who have perpetuated violence and stuff against people of color as well. So maybe it's not just white people in law enforcement. So the blame isn't there. Maybe it's law enforcement and their ideals as a whole. Maybe they need more diversity, equity, and inclusion. Maybe they need to understand that the entire reason that they are in the position that they are in is not to brutalize black people, but to actually protect us, and then deal with some of the biases and stereotypes that come into that they may walk into the police force with, saying that when you see a black man running a red light, he's not an immediate threat. When you see a black woman raising her voice, maybe she's raising her voice not because she's trying to be aggressive, but maybe because she's nervous and she feels like she's already not heard. So the only way for her to be heard is to raise her voice so that you understand that she's serious about this. And so it's it's a complex conversation, especially around Tyree Nichols, and God rest his soul. But we do have to understand that these things are happening disproportionately to black people as a whole, and the way to really get these instances lessened is to bring awareness to them, like Leslie has been saying the entire time. Awareness is the key, and as we gain awareness in these different arenas, then we can have the knowledge to understand what it is to potentially change it. So so yeah, that's what I'll say. That's what I'll say about that without going too long.
Okay. Well, but no, thank you for sharing. And also, what I heard in there, you talked about awareness, which
Mhm.
shout out to the people who are listening, because you're working towards, probably your better judgment to have a snack, to go veg out and look at, do a doom scroll on TikTok. And you are purposefully and intentionally taking time so that you can learn and perhaps grow. That's what our goal is here on this
Yep.
earth. We're here to learn, grow, and be better than we were yesterday, not better than the Joneses, because you can only really compare to yourself. But
Yep.
in the realm of business, it's important that we understand our biases, and then we understand how to support those who are dealing with complex trauma. So just like Phillip said, if Joe comes in and Joe's having a tough day because he's just experienced this secondhand trauma, from the release of this video, how can you hold space for them? Or even if you're maybe not equipped to hold space, how can you direct him to a life guide, to your EAP, so that they can get therapy without seeming like you're prodding or you're, in their business. And that's it's a slip. I don't want to say a slippery slope, but it's a challenging thing to understand and build a relationship, to know how you can address or even approach support for others. But it starts with understanding your inherent biases, your lenses, the way you see the world, which is typically perpetuated by society, by things that you're told. Like mostly everything that is someone told you, or or you saw, and then you are like, all right, that's me. So we have to understand who we are and how our microaggressions can fit in. So speaking of microaggressions, I want to share.
Hold on real quick, Doctor.
Oh, stop me. Go for it. Go for
it. I saw Tia put in a question about like minority on minority, and she said, how do you not feel some type of way? She said, trusting the police is something based off the interaction, but yet as a person of color, there's still fear. How do we get through it? The first thing to know about minority on minority is crimes of violence normally happen in the vicinity of
proximity,
the people that you live with. It's all proximity based. And so to say black on black crime, it's not really a thing, because there's everybody on everybody crime is committed in proximity. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, so in interactions with law enforcement, right? So as citizens, we are, for lack of a better term, regular people. Law enforcement took an oath to put themselves into situations that could potentially be stressful, and they have gone through rigorous training in order to deal with those stressful situations, because their intent is to protect the public. So when we are in interactions with police, or in anybody, regular citizens are in interactions with police, it is law enforcement's first duty to de-escalate the situation. They are there for that. No matter if somebody is breaking the law, they seem as though they're violent. Now, they obviously, you have a duty to protect yourself, but at the same time, they are the professionals in this situation. And so they are held, or should be held, to a higher standard than a regular Joe Schmo that you're pulling over on the street. And so whenever, and I'm not saying that Tia is saying this, but, and whenever we look at law enforcement and their interaction with regular people, the reason, a large reason why people get appalled by the police treatment of people, and especially as it pertains to violent treatment, is because the police are supposed to be the professionals. They are supposed to be the ones specifically trained to not go that route, and yet we see them go that route and beyond over and over and over again. And so they have a responsibility to us. We don't necessarily have a responsibility to them. You get what I'm saying? So
I do,
that,
but I do want to challenge that a little bit, just a little bit, as far as our responsibility to them is to have compassion.
yes,
which is
I agree.
that they are in a completely difficult position that people typically would not want to be in. Rather that's dealing with a violent crime, dealing with child abuse or neglect or anything like that. It's a difficult situation. So it's important for us to still have compassion for them in that in those difficult moments.
I agree.
And I like that. I like the way that if you notice how you can disagree and you can push back. And I encourage everyone here on this call to push back. For example, there was a comment by Emma, in the chat, just wanting to know, because police is a business. She stated, I do not believe police or justice system are here to protect us. It's a business. How do we fight against this? And the way that we fight against is, of course, you start with your civil right to vote. Putting in your local government, which will then create the legislation for your local areas where you start. But you also support it by being a voice, just like we talked about, advocating for when you see wrong. It's like, hey, this is wrong, just calling it out. And you can fight this by being better yourself. It starts with us. This is a real example. I've seen people who say, I hate the police, yada, 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 but then they're doing like criminal things. And
right.
And then they're, when the police come in and say, hey, you were doing a criminal thing, they're like, oh, you're just doing this because I'm me. And it's like, but you are definitely doing something criminal. So take accountability for what you're doing, in those moments, or what you're doing on a daily basis.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's so true. Well, I had to, it's so funny. I'm going to share this. I want to be very transparent, but my son, which this is quite a few years ago, was going through a lot of issues with his driver's license and tags on his car and not taking care of his responsibilities. And his attitude was, oh, they want to pull me out. Well, they're pulling you over because you don't have the right. It's like, let's put this up. And that's mine. I gave birth to that.
Right.
But we had to sit down and have a talk, because it's like some of these things you bring into yourself. And also, yes. I really feel like some of these situations now, definitely not Tyree. We're not talking about the extremes here, but we are talking about some things that can be eliminated. We're talking about some things that you have to change your perspective on. If you're just not out here obeying the law, and then you get pulled over and you go through all of these processes, you can't be going saying, oh, I was a target just because I was driving and I was a black male or they saw me. It's like, do you get what I'm saying? So I had to have that talk with mine, because
that's 100%.
He wanted to jump on the bandwagon with everyone else. Like, I know I was a target. Like, they wouldn't ever pull me up. No, they pulled you over because your tags were expired and because you're giving them a and you want to get aggressive because you're just trying to get to work. Well, I don't get paid till Friday. Okay. Well, you don't drive. You know what I mean? Like, this kind of thing, And that's, like I said, that was one of mine that, we had to have this talk. But then you do have these situations that are these, extremes that you want to have that talk as well. And a part of his experience, and I'll say this, I don't want to get long-winded because we only have a short period of time. Well, one of the reasons also too that he really felt so deep, not outside of him not doing what he needed to do to obey the law, but years before that, there was a situation where he was an innocent bystander going to a friend's house. They were going to play paintballs. He had a gun in his hand. A neighbor called and said there's a black male walking through the schoolyard with a gun. Police pulled up on him and drew their gun. Thank goodness at age, I think he was like 11 or 12, he knew not to run, and the police brought him home to me, and I'm standing there numb because he's like, well, he's walking through the school. We got a call that he had a gun with an orange tip on it, which is why they put orange tips on play guns.
Right.
So that was my question. You see this gun, 11-year-old or 12-year-old kid. And I understand, like you said, Dr. Day, they're their job to be out here to protect and to serve, the first thing is to de-escalate a situation. Thank goodness this was not someone that was just, an officer that was trigger happy. He really, told my son, thank goodness my son didn't run. So based off of his trauma from the past, now he feels, well, I'm a target. It's like,
right.
You know what I'm saying? So
I mean, and thank God you had that officer because,
right.
God
Yeah. And I've
forbid,
often
Tamir
thank
Rice,
God,
you
Phillip.
know what I
Yes,
mean? Like
absolutely.
that has happened. And so
Often
yeah,
that moment. And I
yeah,
mean, it's just somebody just put in the chat, it sends chills. It still sends chills in my body because when he showed up at the door with my son, and it's like, I heard how everything transpired at that schoolyard. I'm thinking it could have been a whole different encounter at my front door. So yeah.
No doubt. I have a question to interject here. I'm going to read it out. I think this is a really good question. Victoria put, how do we break that cycle where we teach our kids that racism and injustice is out there without them going and looking for it or being a victim whenever negative encounters arise? Awesome question. So first, I'd like to share, I have, I just talked to my daughter about this actually 2 days ago, where, so she is a, young Black girl where we live. She's one of the 2% of Black people in this area.
Wow.
And yeah, so she kind of stands out, and she has hair like mine. She has, we're long hair, don't care. And, someone asked to touch her hair. And so this question is so serious, and it's good it can also relate to how we approach things in business, because how you're taught to do something is how you're going to do it. And so because of her upbringing, she was informed that if someone's trying to touch your hair, oh, that's racist. That they're instantly trying to belittle you or make fun of you. We started to switch that perspective and say, what if this person is really interested because you are someone that they've never seen before, and they are just looking to learn more, and they addressed it or they asked in a proper way, rather than just doing it without asking, which again, doing it without asking is a microaggression. It's more than a microaggression. You're touching somebody without their strict permission. So being aware of the microaggressions that you do for others. So how do we break that cycle? We break that by changing perspectives and asking, are there alternative ways that this could have, or the genesis of this? So I wanted to share that. And I'd like to hear from you. How do you think we could break that cycle of how we teach our kids about racism and injustice?
Leslie?
Well, I think that Dr. Dave said it beautifully, how he just sat down and talked to his daughter and really gave her a different perspective, gave her an opportunity, and threw something out there at her so that she could have an opportunity to say, oh, you know what? I never thought about it that way. And I think us as parents, as leaders, I think that it's important that we do take those perspectives and put them on the table, because sometimes if you don't have that, you just don't have it. But then when someone gives it to you, then it changes your mind, which then changes your situation, which then, changes as a whole eventually. And then you stop having these one-offs because, these are our future. These young people are our future. And so when you can start that ripple effect, and then maybe they can share with another friend if they're having a conversation and say, oh, well, I went, I was out with a friend or whatever was going on. And, I know these cops were looking at us and they gave us a hard time, and, but it's like, what was going on at the time? What was
the context, the setting?
Right. What was the context of it? And I think that we as parents have a responsibility to ask the questions, and also listen to the answers, because once you listen to the answers of what they're saying, then you know exactly where to pinpoint that if you're really, if you really want to address those issues. So I just think sitting down and having just an open, very transparent conversation with your children is very important nowadays. And it's not okay just to have them sit down and watch the media or and not have some dialogue to go along with that, because there are a lot of things going on out here. And, we have social media where you have all these things posted when there's verdicts for things. And then before you can even get to them, they're already stirred up by what social media is putting on. And, and then they're all in this where you can hardly penetrate that bubble.
Yeah.
I think that we have to monitor that interaction with social media and also with the media in general, because they paint this, you just got to be hands on as a parent. That's
you got to be hands on, and I want
hands on. There's no way around that. You can't let media raise your child and put those thought seeds there and let them grow out of control. Are you putting a level of awareness there? You are, but don't let the weeds grow into that, because you're going to be the one that has to hopefully not, trample through those weeds to find your child one day, because they're so far off in this vigilante behavior that they're not even making a point anymore. They're just wanting to be heard.
They're just doing it.
They're just doing
that nihilism. So speaking of that, I think it's also important. This is called Jedi. That's one of the reasons why I titled this. Yes, that's related to Star Wars. One thing that happened in a recent Star Wars movie is just thought process of unlearning what you've learned. So that's another way, is sometimes we have to unlearn what we've learned. And that includes what we've been taught in school, or what we've been taught as how to run a proper organization. It used to be, you don't talk about this stuff in organizations. You leave your trauma at the door, you leave yourself at the door. Don't bring all that here. We are unlearning what we've learned for, however many years. And that's how you do it, is being open to doing that. But I want to jump over to Phillip and ask you as well, how do you feel you can address that with kids, and adults alike?
I think the first thing is, I think, like Leslie said, having the honest conversations, because I think at a point kids can tell when you're trying to lead them in a way that may be inauthentic to however you're living or however they perceive the world. They know, and so being able to speak to them in an honest manner and say, hey, this is what's going on, and just going back to Victoria's question, but teaching them that racism and injustice is out there is by telling them the history of how these things started and how it has perpetuated, honestly, without the sugarcoating it or things like that, because people need to know the honest, authentic truth, because there are horrors there. And oftentimes when something feels that bad, you stir up something in people that will make them want to change. And so if they hear that this happened and this was terrible to them, and you're speaking honestly with them about that, the next question could be, well, how do I not do that? Boom. Now we are already on the path to, okay, good. I'm glad that you understand that this is what that was. This is how that happened. And these people didn't do anything to deserve it. But we in this house, we in your friends group, we at school have an opportunity to change it. This is how we change it, by making sure that all of your friends, regardless of what they look like, are included in whatever you're doing. If you're playing kickball and everybody seems to not be picking the Mexican kid, you pick the Mexican kid. You know what I mean? Like inclusion. If you see that there's a group and y'all getting into groups and there's a black kid who is not being included because people for whatever reason don't feel as though they're smart, include that person. That's how you bring the innovation and the inclusion into our children, not by not allowing them to make the same mistakes that have historically happened when parents taught their children the ideals that they grew up with. Breaking the cycle is as simple as deciding that this is going to end with me. I'm not going to allow whatever was given to me to proceed into my children, especially if it's a thought that makes people feel as though they don't exist. They're invisible. They feel terrible. We have an opportunity to change that. And so I feel as though that's how you change it. You don't shy away from what happened, because the horrors need to be known. Because if you do not understand or learn history, then what you are is doomed to repeat it. We're not trying to repeat what happened in the past. We are trying to move forward with the idea that everybody is able to sit at the table and able to have a voice and able to be seen, heard, and respected, no matter
Yeah.
gender, identity, race, color, size, disability, any of that stuff. And so that's how you do it. And then also the negative part, the being a victim, is just personal accountability. Even if you're doing everything right, sometimes, especially as a person of color, you will be microaggressed against, or even macroaggressed against. Sometimes it just happens. And understanding that those things happen, and that you may not have done anything to deserve it, but those things exist. And so but that also doesn't give you a license to now be whatever the stereotypical view of you is.
Yes.
You get to be, you still have an obligation to yourself, not to anybody else, to yourself, to be the best you. At all times. People are not going to like it. People are going to try and shut it down. People are going to act like you being the best you isn't enough. It is. It is. And if you let other people define what the best you is, then what you're doing is you're falling into that trap of prejudice and stereotypical behavior that they expected from you anyway. So
is there a mic drop emoji? I don't think so. But we're coming down to the end. Of course, this could be an entire series, and we do want to continue the conversation, especially about how organizations can address these levels of microaggressions that occur, how to deal with sometimes privilege. And I know sometimes privilege can be a hard word to take. Some people may not take it, or in a personal way, but I just want to speak to my privilege. I am a male. So when I walk around like an office or anything like that, thank you for the mic drops in the chat. For those of you who are watching on the recording, in the chat, there's mic drops dropping everywhere. I appreciate you. We're all fam. But as a male, if I'm walking around an office and I am, again, not thinking about people who may have experienced sexual violence, I'm not a person who's experienced it. I have to check my privilege as a man walking around and acting the way that I do. We all have those, and by understanding them, we can, of course, be better than we were yesterday. And that's really all that we're trying to do, is be better than we were yesterday. So we want to leave you with a couple of, articles. I know we posted Phillip's article a little bit earlier, but we're going to lead you with a little bit of literature that can support you. If you are, again, someone who's in this DE&I space and you're working with less funding, and you want to create some solutions within your organization, we're going to pop them in the chat. I believe they may come out to you as well in the follow-up. One of them is, How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And I recently, I'm learning about how my privilege in some situations may have exacerbated something. And you see, okay, I see you. Phillip's got it.
I got it. I got it.
Phillip's got it. And it's a good read for all, not just for people who are trying to make change, but just people who are trying to understand different cultures, different lifestyles. The other one is Ta-Nehisi Coates. He has a book called The Water Dancer. Beautiful book. Earlier we were joking about like what book program this would be in, and what did we say, Leslie? This would be on what's her name? How can I forget her name?
Oprah's book.
Yeah, I'm gonna forget her name. How dare I? Don't let Oprah see this. She'll get me hemmed up somewhere.
No, but yeah, this was good, and
absolutely.
The whole goal is to be able to live in harmony with each other, and by examining how we haven't lived in harmony, that's how we get to living in harmony. And so,
right. That's one of the quickest, easiest, best effective ways to bring the past into the now without dwelling there is, like you said, look at it, examine it, but how can we be a better version? What can we do better? And it starts within our own families. It starts with our children. It starts with having those awkward discussions that we don't want to have sometimes, but we have to. It's important. We can't run from it. It's here. And taking those same discussions in the workplace and having the difficult discussions. But as an effective leader knows, sometimes those discussions have to be had for growth.
Yep.
Because if you don't, the chances that you'll grow into this next phase that we're headed into, the likelihood will be very minimal. In any corporation, business, large or small, I think it's very important. You cannot run from this. We got to bring the awareness and put it on the table.
Yep, I agree.
Wonderful. Well, we've kept everyone a little bit over. I appreciate. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you to all of the crew working in the background for getting this done. Thank you so much, Sharon. And let's continue this conversation. I encourage everyone, continue this conversation within your organizations. If you have questions or if you'd like to see some topics covered, please reach out to our team. And peace be with everyone. Happy Black
thank
History
you
Month.
everyone for showing up.
Thank you.
This is where it starts. We had a nice turnout. So yeah.
Yep. This is where it starts right here.
This is where it starts.
Happy Mardi Gras, and shout out to the CIAA, the MIA people out there. All right.
There you go.
All right, guys.
All right, y'all.
Have a good one.